Good afternoon. My name is Lorna McDaniel, and I am president of Tempo Waukesha. We are now live streaming this program. Those of you who are watching the live stream can submit any questions using your YouTube chat. I just wanted to give a quick snapshot of our members. We have representation from 14 industries, and we have about 80 members. Reminder to our members, our invoices for our fiscal year, which started in July, are now due. So for those guests who are interested, please see me or Sandy Sarah, if you could stand. Please see her for more information. Well, live streaming did not see you stand. Next month, join us in September at the Sharon Wilson Center to hear from Christine Specht, who will share with us her experience as the president and CEO of Cousin Subs. In November, we're going to have a virtual economic forecast review. And last year it was very interesting. So it'll be very interesting to see what our presenter will share with us about the upcoming year. And then in December, we're going to be back here at Westmore on Tuesday, December 14th, where we're going to have a member holiday bazaar. More information to come on that. In addition, to our lunches, we also have a get-together for some fun events. We have virtual cocktails at 4 o'clock on the first Tuesday of every month, and we also have virtual coffee on the second Thursday of every month at 8 a.m. This information is on our website, and it will also give you the information to join via the links. We have also done some fun events. We did some golfing last month, and we're looking to maybe do another session in the fall. We've had some traveling cocktails where people have been able to connect and meet over cocktails in person. So please please visit our website for more information. Now I want to share with you our Celebrating Women Leaders event, which will be October 19th at the Embassy Suites from 11:30 to 1:30. We're going to highlight the achievement of two outstanding female community and business leaders in southeastern Wisconsin. And we're going to recognize women that have stood out and exemplified true grit. Our keynote speakers, Jennifer Bartolotta and Beth Wanook, who will share with us their stories on grit and courage under pressure. There are still sponsorship opportunities available, and the Celebrating Women's Leaders Nomination Selection Committee has chosen the awardees for the Professional and Community Leader Award. So please watch your email for that announcement to come out later this week. I would now like to introduce Liz, who is now going to introduce our speaker, Karen. Thank you, Liz.
Hello, everybody. My name is Liz. I'm the VP of Programs for Tempo Waukesha. Karen Hung is the CEO and founder of Silver Rock Consulting. Silver Rock focuses on transformation and growth via co-creation of business models and strategies to catalyze leadership alignment and market momentum. Ms. Hung has corporate and client experience and agility across a range of sectors. Some of her clients include Ascension Healthcare, Kohler, MetLife, Abbey, Johnson Controls, Sub-Zero, and Goodwill. Prior to founding Silver Rock, Ms. Hung was a Senior Vice President, Global Chief Marketing Officer with Lands' End. She has held C-suite and other executive positions, leading global teams with General Electric, Ann Taylor, and Citigroup in the functional areas of strategy, marketing, and innovation. Ms. Hung serves as a director on the boards of KeHE, a national B Corp food distributor, Florence Eisman Company, an upscale children's apparel brand, and Ascension Wisconsin Healthcare. She has taught MBA and undergraduate entrepreneurship and leadership courses at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee Lubar School of Business. As an active civic leader, Ms. Hung serves on the board of directors of the Harvard Business School Club of Wisconsin, immediate past president, the Rotary Club of Wisconsin, or Milwaukee, as President-elect, the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra as Governance Chair, and Junior Achievement of Wisconsin as Strategy Chair. I'm out of breath just reading all of that. My goodness. Ms. Hung has been recognized and honored as Women of Influence this year, 2021, Notable Women on Boards 2021, and Women of Distinction in 2019. Karen Hung has earned an MBA from the Harvard Business School and a BA from Washington University of St. Louis. So please give me a warm welcome for Karen Hung.
Thank you, Liz and Lorna. We get settled in. How's everybody today? Good. Well, I have the privilege. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Okay. And hello to the live stream audience. Thanks for joining us. I have the privilege of speaking with you all today on a topic around boards. But one thing that I think, walk around a little bit. One thing that I think is interesting is really to hear from you all what you like to get out of today. So I'd love to just hear from some of you what you would love to understand, because I'm here for you today. I'm here for you today. So a couple of folks, some of the things that are interesting on your mind about boards. What's this all about? Yes. Go ahead, Sandy, and then we'll go.
Why you join the board and what you get out of it.
Okay, why you join a board, what you get out of it. Great, Sandy, thank you.
If you're on the board, how do you encourage more participation and passion from fellow board members?
Board engagement.
Keep them engaged.
Yeah.
Obviously, once a month or once every other month.
You know, if we solve that one, that's a big one. Okay, why on board engagement? Maybe one or two more? Yeah.
We've kind of moved into the area of asking a potential board for a seat to sit on a committee first. So just to see if they can test us, we can test them. So that's kind of a requirement before they join our board.
Okay, so
Wanted to get your feedback on that.
okay, so feedback around kind of entering into a board and what that could look like. Yeah. Go ahead.
Kind of piggybacking on that, what are just general average requirements to be on a board?
Okay, general average requirements to be on the board. I'm just repeating so the live stream audience can hear. Okay, great. Well, I think that's a good starting point. And what I'd like to do, I'm taking notes here so I don't forget. What I'd like to do is just make this as interactive as possible. I do have a general outline for today, and it's really to talk about, I'm going to start with the goals. Very goal-driven, right? So the goal that I would have for all of us in the room is to be able to learn something new that you can use for yourself or use for someone else to share forward, okay? So that's the goal. Does that make sense? Works for everybody? Okay. And then in terms of the flow, it's going to be like 3 C's. We're going to look at a little bit of context. What's our market looking like today? What are things looking like from a board world? Number 2 is a construct, and it might get into some of the questions around, how can people ramp on, things like that. And then from a career standpoint, why do boards make sense? The question that Sandy asked, like, why boards? So that's kind of our roadmap for today in our time. Okay? Make sense? Sound good? Okay. Okay. So I've already asked you this question, kind of why are you here? What interests you about boards? Or why? So if there's anybody with anything else who want to make a comment, if not, I'm going to just keep moving. Okay. Let's talk about content a little bit. Right now is actually prime time for women to be on boards. We've had conversations for multiple decades about getting more women's voices on boards. And I would say, and I'm looking at Sandy because she and I are also on the Milwaukee Women Inc. board together that tracks women on boards. And Donna is as well. She's a member as well. And what I would say is this is kind of, we saw a little movement over the decades, but now we're seeing a stronger ramp. And so with that specifically, I just want to highlight a few things. One, recently, NASDAQ, right? Some of you may have heard this from the SEC, is now requiring all public companies to have 1 woman and 1 person of color on publicly traded boards. Now, my understanding is it's a bit of a confirm and report kind of policy right now. I'm not sure if there's kind of a penalty. However, it's really a strong statement and one that I think we should all feel really good about. So that's the NASDAQ and SEC. California in 2018, California required publicly traded companies to have at least one woman on their board, and with actually this year, end of this year, being one of the deadlines. So also a very strong movement there. Wisconsin. So Wisconsin, we have reached, I think last year in 2020, we reached 20.8%. So we hit the 20% mark. 20.8% of publicly traded companies in Wisconsin having at least one woman on the board. And in this last year, we inched it up a little bit to 21.1%. Okay, so good progress, and I think the milestone of hitting over 20% by 2020 is a big deal. One data point that's not as kind of happy, but something for us to watch is there's a statistic around publicly traded companies in Wisconsin. We had roughly about 30-something% with 3 or more women on boards. This past year, we went back to about 26%. And the general understanding of why is around kind of general retirement. Okay, so these are just some statistics. The bigger overarching reason around why companies should want women on boards is because there's a lot of reporting, whether it's McKinsey or Deloitte, who talk about companies being more profitable, stronger performance when they have women in both their executive ranks and in their board seats. Okay, so it's really for them. You all have probably heard this. It's good business. It's good business. Women think differently. We kind of think more laterally. We bring different experiences to bear. And especially, this piece I want to amplify, especially the last 18 months we all lived through, for those who've been on boards, we have really had some big, tough discussions from a sustainability, solvency, and moral obligation. And I remember having a conversation with an EVP from one of our larger publicly traded companies in our region, and I talked about the moral obligation around boards, and she said to me, wow, those are really big words. That could actually scare people. And I said, well, that's what we're meant to do, is to really think about the big issues, both short-term and long-term. Okay, so that's a bit of market context, big decisions, a lot of focus. ESG is very big right now, right? The environmental social governance, DEI, very big on boards right now, as well as financial solvency, financial sustainability from a go-forward standpoint. Questions about this? Anything anybody wants to add? Okay. All right, this is my own kind of thinking around women on boards, and Sandy and Donna may have heard me say this. There's 3 A's. I work in strategy, so frameworks I think they're fun and they're memorable. So 3 A's around kind of how to think about women on board. So one is advocacy. I would say everybody here in this room and in live streaming, we all can be advocates. Everybody can be an advocate of having women on boards. So we also may have the other A's, women who are active on boards. I'd love to have a show of hands. Who are women in here who are active on boards today? Okay, so roughly about a third to half. And then the next, oops. All right, let me escape out here. The next A is aspiring. So who are the women who want to be on boards? Let me see a show of hands. Okay, so about, again, a third to a half. Great. So for the women who are active and the women who are advocates, we can all help each other, especially the aspiring women. All of us. Okay? So let's keep going here. Why join a board? There's really kind of 3 components to maybe think about why join a board. Because when you join a board, if you take nothing else away from today, remember this. You join a board to serve and to give and to contribute. You join a board to serve, to give, and contribute, no matter what the construct is. That's the biggest takeaway if I can impart that to you. Now, here are some ways you can do it in terms of why join a board. First, skills. So how many of you have phenomenal skills that you may or may not actually use in your job? Right, I'm looking at Sandy. She's nodding her head. Should I put you on the spot, Sandy? What are some skills that you have that you don't use necessarily in your job, but in a board capacity you use?
Well, some of the financial oversight and some
Financial oversight. Yeah, absolutely. It's really great. Maybe some of you who are active on boards, maybe another example. Others? What was it?
I'm good at event work.
Event work. Yeah. And you don't do it in a job. And you know, like both of those are really very helpful. So skills. Think of skills of things you do that you do well, you like to do, that you may not do in your job. Experience. So from an experience standpoint, this is where you could pull in a lot of your career, right, experiences. So what I would say is boards look often for what I would call domain expertise. Now, what does that mean? Usually comes in the form of either functional expertise, right? Oh, we need a marketing person. Oh, we could use a lawyer. Oh, we could use somebody in HR. Oh, we could use somebody in strategy. Oh, we could use someone in supply chain, right? And how many of you are in companies where supply chain is a big issue, right? You know, right, everybody. So functional skills, functional experience, really helpful. Sector experience, also domain expertise. Well, we need somebody in medical devices. Well, it'd be great to have, you know, somebody in healthcare. It'd be great to have somebody in publishing. So these are some different experience spaces that are highly valuable, right? So skills and experience, not always the same, highly valuable. Now, I want to switch gears. So this is what companies may value. And in terms of you, make sure it's life-giving, right? Like, I love my board work. I love my board work. Why? It keeps me mentally sharp. I learn about what's going on out there. It makes me a better leader, right? I enjoy the relationships and I enjoy the challenges. So think about why, for you, it would be life-giving, right? Because board work is board work. It's work, right? But it's also meant to be life-giving. Let me just pause. Questions or comments? Anybody from live stream? Nope, not yet? Okay. All right. The other piece, you know, as I was thinking about today, of, you know, when people might think about joining boards, I was thinking about from a different dimension. It's like, well, there could be stages in a career or stages in life that you think about joining a board. I remember I lived in New York before I moved to Milwaukee, and a good friend of mine was saying to me, and she was president of ABC Disney or something like that at the time. She said, Karen, you really should think about joining boards. It's like, what are boards? You know, like, why should I think about boards? What does that mean? And it's really become important. And I give her, you know, I'm grateful to her for planting the seed. So in terms of stages of career, you know, it could be something that you think about earlier in your career, to start thinking about it and think about how I can on-ramp. It could be something you more aggressively, and this isn't hard and fast, so I'm not saying these are the rules and the timeframes. But it may be something for some people, they think about kind of midway in leadership, right? How do I extend my leadership capabilities to learn more so I can continue to advance in my company? And sometimes, you know, it's for those who are very senior, right? They're like, and they're starting to invest. And so those are kind of stages of career. And also before retirement, or as they move into retirement. There are a lot of people, especially for those who are interested in for-profit boards, that where you get paid, think about this as a next phase of career, right? I retire, but then I can also stay engaged, be active, and earn income through a different stream. Okay, so those are kind of stages of a career. Stages of life. There's also a life component, and especially as women, we think about life components, right? When we have kids, when we, you know, our families are doing different things. So there may be stages of life where you might feel like either one, it's a priority, or two, maybe when you have extra capacity, but that's not always true because we always fill up our capacity, right? So, you know, there are different phases of your life where it may make more sense, where you want to be out in the community, out in the different circles and your sector circles more so. Okay. So I think that's kind of getting into why join boards and kind of what it means to be on a board. Oh. All right, let's move to our next piece. So that's kind of the context that we just talked about. It's a great time to be on boards, the reasons why, and what life context you may want to think about. This next piece is a little bit going to be on the construct of boards, okay? And again, for those who are experienced on boards, feel free to jump in. This is generally one way to look at boards, generally one way. If you Google it, there's probably a few different other ways to look at it. But they're nonprofit, right? So nonprofit boards, and those are phenomenal boards to be part of in terms of contributing, also learning, and ramping in. Private company boards are really nice segues into for-profit, and then public companies. I would say public companies are maybe the hardest or harder to get on out of these three, because there's a lot more scrutiny and maybe more limited seats. So private company could be privately owned by a single owner, could be investor group, could be PE backed, it could be multi-generational family. We've got a lot of multi-gen family large companies here in our state. So those are some ways to kind of think about that. Okay. Let me just see, for those who are active on boards, how many are in nonprofit boards here? Okay, so a good portion of those, okay. How many on private company boards? Okay, all right, couple. 2 people. Any public? Okay. All right. Great. And then what I thought might be helpful. So those are the organizations. These are kind of some of the board types. And they're not mutually exclusive, right? So you could have some who work in a few different areas. And I thought I'd just walk through this. Have you all seen this before? No? Okay. So just governing board. Most boards have some level of governance, right? So oversight, direction, so governing boards are usually par for the course and usually the reason for being. Certainly in the companies, governance are really important. Certainly in large nonprofits, governance are really important. Managing, the second one here, managing an executive board. So these may be kind of more smaller company boards where the board can function a little bit like the executive team, depending on the size of the company. So, for example, I'm on one board that's a little bit smaller, and earlier on, we were actually part of the decision-making of where the direction that company should go. So as an example, we were deciding what to invest in from a digital strategy, and so usually that would be at an executive team level. The board really kind of kicked that around quite a bit, right? So kind of big strategy pivots. Another example of a managing board could be, an executive board could be making decisions around which markets to enter, right? So those are a couple examples of managing executive boards. And at that point in time, we were meeting monthly. So it really felt like, we were part of the senior team. Fundraising boards. All right, so how many of you have been very involved in fundraising boards, right? Yeah, a lot of hands and smiles here. So oftentimes with nonprofits, it's a governing board, but it's also a fundraising board. And so when you're thinking about joining nonprofit boards, just be really clear. And we talked about skill sets. Also know kind of where and how you play well, right, in that. Because in some boards, there is a big financial expectation to join and to help raise funds, right? It's the give, get, or get off, right? Okay, so that's the fundraising board. And if it's not something you want to do, be clear about it. Right? Because the last thing you want to do is have mismatched expectations. It's like a job, right? When you join an organization, you want to make sure the chemistry fits. You want to make sure expectations fit, because there are expectations of board members besides just showing up for, quarterly meetings. Okay, other kinds of boards. Working boards. So how many of you feel like you've been on working boards? Okay, so I would love to hear a couple examples. Maybe over here. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I serve on a Mid-America Chamber Executive Board, and it is very much a working board because it's representation from 6 different states.
Yeah. So a Mid-America Chamber Board, and that board actually is a great example because oftentimes working boards, not always, are part of organizations that are membership driven. So that's a great example. Yeah. Example here.
Worked on a not-for-profit board, but they really, the woman who indicated event management, I think they thought their board was, their team for,
Right.
you know, whatever needed to be done, which is fine, but I agree that expectation is certainly not
Yeah.
shared as you're invited to, you know,
Right.
be part of it.
That's another great example. Yeah, it does oftentimes happen that your skills and the expectations that you'll kind of be doing the work versus advising or governing on that. Yeah, Donna.
Following up on that question, what are good, if you're thinking about or been invited to think about a board,
Mhm.
so what are some good questions to verify?
Oh,
How much time do you, like,
Mhm.
what are some good questions that somebody considering the board should
Yeah.
ask? How much time do you think this will expect?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
kind of the commitment they're looking for.
That's a great question. So Donna asked the question just as a follow-up. What are the kinds of questions you can ask when you're considering a board or where you're being considered for a board to kind of vet things out? So some of the questions are in terms of what are the expectations of the board members, right? So that's kind of a blanket question. And specifically, what's the time commitment? What's a financial commitment? Any other kinds of commitment, whether it's securing sponsorships or anything like that, right? Yeah, attending events. So those kinds of things might be some clear, how many doors can you open for us, right? So those are some questions. And the other thing to listen for are things like, how much, not only at the board level, but also at the committee level, are you expected to be involved, right? Are you expected to be in a committee? What do the committees do? Because oftentimes, if the board's not a working board, the committees are working committees. Okay, and it's all good, just kind of know what it is. Another question you can ask is, what's the style of the board leadership? What are the dynamics of the board? What's the culture of the board? And you can get a sense of that. Oh, we're really hands-on. Oh, we're not that engaged, right? So you can get a sense of that. Two other kinds of boards I just want to point out. Again, there's a few others. Board of Advisors. So does anyone know what's the biggest difference between a board of director and board of advisor? Yes, go ahead, Carl. That's right. Yes, that's right. So Carlos talked about its fiduciary responsibility, voting, so difference between accountability, direct accountability for directors. So if you're a board of director and you have fiduciary responsibility, voting rights, which means setting direction, and it's very interesting in those situations to know who has controlling interest, especially in a company. For those who are considering those kinds of boards, definitely ask if they have director's insurance, because you want to be covered as an individual that if something should happen, unforeseen, that you won't be liable personally, but the board in aggregate would be accountable. Okay, so that's really a big distinction between a board of director and a board of advisors, or folks who are trusted in a cabinet coming in to give advice. They're just as engaged too, just as vetted. They may not know as deep of details on certain things, like maybe sometimes not the financials. So, for example, in private companies, you may have a board of advisors because you may or may not want to show all the financials, but they're totally in it with you. Okay. And then policy board, I kept up here because there are some organizations that are more policy oriented, and they would seek board thinking around which policies to really support or not. And these are sort of more political action groups as an example of that. Okay. So I'm going to just pause, and you can see the range of boards. So there are a lot of different kinds of boards to be involved in. I would say kind of the more common ones in our region would be governing for sure, and fundraising for nonprofits, the combination, and the governing, managing, executive director, or maybe working boards in other situations. Questions, comments? Does this make sense? Yeah. Okay. All right, let me keep going. All right, I'm going to just walk through, but I'm checking on time. How are we on time? Okay, so there's a few things that may be helpful, especially those who may not be familiar with boards. It's kind of a little bit of board composition. And so usually for a board, you will have, let's just take a company board, or actually it works for nonprofit boards, that usually the top seat, the top leader, is part of the board. The question is whether or not they have voting rights. So in some situations, they may not have voting rights, because you'll see so-and-so was named CEO or COO, and was also named a board of director. So when they get named that board of director, it's kind of a big deal because you get that seat. And again, Carla mentioned it, it's voting rights, which is really important in terms of power, direction, and a lot of the fiduciary responsibilities. So CEO team members. Now what's interesting is we've been in board meetings, lots of board meetings where staff shows up, which is great. They add additional perspective and things like that. But just because you show up at a meeting doesn't mean you're on the board. And they may not have voting rights. Okay, so just kind of a little distinction there. You have directors, right? So general members. Directors oftentimes are committee members, right? You join a committee. And there is a piece around progression in a board. Like I felt like even though I wasn't getting paid in these nonprofit boards, I felt like I was getting promoted with more responsibility with, 2 times 0 of the pay. So, so with that, when you get into a committee chair, that's usually, a nice vote of confidence in terms of both your contribution, your leadership that you've been involved in. So it's really nice when you're chairing a committee. It's also a nice step into potentially being a board chair over time, which also is definitely a job. When you're part of and I would say in terms of key committees for boards, certainly because boards are about governance, if you have an opportunity to chair the governance committee, that's a really kind of really important committee chair role for most boards, I would say. The executive committee, in some instances where you have larger boards, you can have an executive committee, and those executive committees usually either by appointment, meaning you're asked, or by bylaws, or and usually within those bylaws could be because of an office you hold within that board that you're part of an executive committee. And so it's really a leadership group, and it could include maybe some of the officers and include a couple other appointees. And then you have the board chair, which anybody in here has been a board chair before? Sandy has. It's another job, right? It's another job. Share a little bit of your experience as a board chair.
So an all-volunteer board with no staff, so we were a working board.
You were definitely a working board.
And the time, it was that you're picking up where other people are dropping the ball, and you're constantly feeling, you want to have this great oversight and vision.
Yeah.
And you really try, but you're down here and you're over here. And my first year, I always picked up a rock and found what was living under it or dead under it. And solve that and move on. And then you get to the next rock. And it took me a year and a 2-year term to really feel like, okay, now we can move forward.
Yeah. I'll just
It was not a struggling organization. It was still just
pretty healthy organization. I'll just recap for our live stream audience. There's a couple of takeaways. One is, as a board chair, you work at all levels. You could be up here and want to be up here, but you're also down here and turning over rocks and finding out what's living or not living under those rocks. And really pulling together this leadership. You're constantly watching what's going on, right? Yeah, Sandy, you want to share a little bit?
Well, I'll share real quick. This is when I was quite young, and I was on a children's charity board that is now part of Children's Hospitals, so I was quite young. And I started out on the Financial Development Committee, and as I've said, I've told this story before, that I just did what they said I should do, and I didn't think that was a big deal, but apparently it was at the time, because I was calling people and asking for money and doing everything, so suddenly I was the committee chair, and a few years later, I was the board chair. And so it was and so I was fairly young, and one of the things that happened is they were changing leadership from someone who had been there for like 25 years. And so there was a search, but I got approached by all these different people advocating for his replacement. And so it got quite political, and I just, somebody's nephew, and there was a judge on the board from the city that was pushing for somebody else, so it was quite contentious at times. So I learned a lot. But the second thing, and I've said, is that it's not just the board you're on, but it's the people that you're with. And so I met several people at the time who I still am in contact with, and it was one of my first boards. Greg Marcus was on that board with me, Al Orr, who's now CEO of Reinhardt, and Mike Pepke, and a couple of other people that, Ann Zizzo and all these people. So people that I met back then, I'm still in contact with, and that is one of the benefits, which I know you talk about. It's not just the cause and what you're doing, it's the people that you're doing with, just like the Temple board here. All the wonderful people that you get to work with was one of the
Yeah.
I can still remember, like, people telling me to try to arrange this successor, and we ended up using an outside firm, and it was crazy. But anyway, I learned a lot.
Learned a lot. Boy, wow. And it's prepared you for other scenarios you've walked through, right? So just to recap for the live stream audience, learn a lot, thrown into some really tough situations that you had to kind of figure out. It's a great learning ground, and developed relationships that have really proven fruitful over time, right? Proven fruitful over time. And I would echo what Sandy said. Let's keep rolling. Oops. So in terms of responsibilities, we've already touched on some of these, and Sandy actually also brought some of these up. And Carla talked about power voting. We talked about fiduciary responsibility, controlling interest. And I mentioned early, what's the moral obligation of the organization? And during COVID, I'll share one story. I remember it was just so intense during many weeks of meeting as a board, because we were concerned about, is this organization going to survive? Are we going to survive financially and otherwise? And we had to make decisions across a number of different entities of what happens if we don't get, these are especially for the nonprofits, PPP, or actually even for-profit. What happens if we don't get assistance, funding? And then what do we do about the people? And how do we make sure we treat them in the right way? And in one particular board that I was on, we had such big debates around, we may not have lights on in 6 months, because in terms of cash flow, and because everything was shut down, right? And so what do we do about the people? Well, we could let them go. They can file for unemployment. We can furlough them, meaning we'll have them come back. But one of the things we also talked about is there a way that we can help provide a bridge? And we talked about, instead of firing everybody, we might have to scale down, and we would pay benefits. Healthcare, in the middle of a healthcare pandemic. A lot of debate, like financially, can we do this? We said it's worth it in the moral obligation that we felt. We may not have used those words, but nonetheless, that was the debate. And we said, we're going to take the risk on our people and pray that the goodwill comes back. And I'll tell you, within 3 to 6 months, the goodwill came back in spades. It's a big heart story. A little emotional here. It was a big heart story, And so when you're on a board, yes, there's fundraising for sure. There's all these day-to-day things, but there are moments that the board, it counts, right? And you're part of this collective brain trust to think about guiding and steering. One thing that's not on here that I think about, when I'm in conversations around, being interviewed for a board or being considered for a board, there's really 3 things that I think about that are really ultimate board responsibilities. One is leadership. Sandy alluded to it, succession planning for the CEO. So leadership. 2 is strategic direction. And 3, culture and values. Leadership, strategic direction, culture and values. Okay, I'm going to keep going here. All right, you know what? I'm going to just move past this quickly. I think we've touched on some of these, especially with some of the stories that have been shared. So you see the oversight. We've talked about that. The direction. The piece I'll point at fundraising we've talked about. Number 6, this is also important, is who is there to be a sounding board and to reflect back to the organization, to the organization's leadership, how they're doing, right? Are they doing well? Keep going. Here are the things you're doing well. Or, hey, we need to make some changes. So at the top of the house, who else is there to hold the senior executive team accountable for who they are and what they do and how they're doing it? So that number 6 is really important. And so, in some boards is really formal, and some boards is more informal. Okay, so we talked about kind of the construct of boards, the type of boards, the types of organizations, types of boards, roles and responsibilities. Let's talk about a little bit of career pathing, and that was a question that somebody had around how do you start thinking about a seat on the board as a trial. So if you think about board, it's actually a career path, right? It is a path. Some people can start as a volunteer. Some can start as a committee member on a board, which is a great way for both parties to test each other out. I actually started just doing volunteer work just to do it, and I got invited on, one or two boards because of that. Not seeking it, but it was really fantastic. Networking, right? So getting referred in, right? People who may be fantastic. People ask you. So networking. Oftentimes, I'm sure there's some big statistic that networking is probably one of the top ways to get referred in for any kind of board. Search, right? So formal search firms around. So that's how I joined KHE. There was a national search. It was a 1-year process for me to join a KHE. Yeah, the KHE story. It was pretty amazing. They were looking for first time ever in their history, first woman on the board. And then they had 2 board seats open up. So I am the first person of color on their board, and I'm actually in sequence the second woman. And it was really kind of neat. I got to take the board seat of the founder. So I felt that was pretty special. But it was a year. It was a year, and I can't tell you how many. I met with every single board member. I met with a few of the executive team in a few different settings. Board network organizations, there's a lot of those around, is Insight and NACD. I think if you join these board networking organizations, you get what you put in. So that's what I would say. I haven't found a lot of value, but I haven't put a lot of time into it, right? So I don't know. Does anybody else have experience with board networking organizations? Okay. All right, so that's kind of a pathway. Let me pause. Questions here, especially since I heard a little bit for aspiring board members, some ways of getting on boards. Okay. Questions around how to get, yeah.
All right, I have a question from the opposite perspective. So I am an interim executive director. And how have you ever had the experience where current board members are bringing to you these great people and you know in your gut that they're not right?
Oh, as far as board candidates? Yeah. Okay. Sounds like you need to talk to the governance chair. All right, so the question is...
What if it is the governance?
Oh, well. We'll do cocktails later. So the question is, if you're in a situation where people are proposing other board members that you just don't think that the right fit, what do you do? Right? What do you do? I think there's a few things that just off the top of my head. One is everyone in the organization clear on the criteria? So if you benchmark against a criteria, it becomes a little bit less around personal relationships or personal preferences. So that might be one. And even if you don't have it today, you can still say, you know what, let's talk about what the criteria is. So you're measuring the same thing. So that's one. Number 2, sometimes with criteria, there's always the fringe, right? You think about the core and you think about the fringe. So it may be conversations, once you get the core of 80% of the criteria, when and how and where would we make exceptions to that in terms of the fringe? So in one organization we're part of, where it's around who do we decide and how much experience they have, we actually had this conversation recently about, in the core we've got the 80%, but what's the totality of the person, what they bring to bear? So they may have less years of experience. If 10 years is the years of experience, if they have 7, but my goodness, look at everything else they've done, you can kind of have that conversation to do that. The other piece is on a different board, we also have this piece around what have they done or what have they not done, right? So are they engaged in community? What else in terms of their reputation? So those might be other kind of data points you can bring into those conversations. Does that help?
Yeah, we're trying to transition from any warm body to, now.
Yeah.
And we've
Transitioning from warm body to like, yeah.
skill sets, but I still get the, my friend over here. And
Yeah.
let them to know who we are and what we do.
Yeah.
But it's, I'm
So I think the criteria,
straightforward.
yeah.
Like to,
Well, I think if you have the criteria, then it depersonalizes it. Yeah. All right. Other questions? And then I don't know how many of you have talked about, have heard about what a board would want to see and hear from you. So have you, who in here has heard about the 3 T's? Okay, so the 3 T's, I actually heard from one of the boards when I joined, and I'm giving you a 4th one because it's bonus. So the 3 T's of what boards look for: time, talent, treasure, right? So how much time can you commit? Remember we talked about skills and experience you can bring to the table, whether it's event planning, even if it's not your job. And then treasure, how much from a financial commitment, so get clear on what that is. Can you make, or can you help, especially with nonprofit boards, can you help them fundraise? And the 4th one is touch. And the touch is, can I help open doors? Can I help convene? Can I help connect? And, Sandy talked about these relationships you build in board circles, right? So how can you help other board members in whatever else is going on in their lives? This is all about contributing. You might get paid for it, but it's about contributing, okay? All right, the other is life. So I don't know if you've heard about this. It's labor, right? So your hands, your influence. How can I help shepherd certain things through? Maybe you are doing a big capital raise. Maybe you are thinking about entering a new market. Maybe there are some really pivotal relationships that you can help influence through. Finances and experience and expertise. So through your 3 or 4 T's, you can help give life to an organization. And with that, I don't know how much time we have left. I know you've heard me say this, but being on a board is about serving, and it's very gratifying. So give, and then you will receive. So that concludes my remarks. Let's just pause for additional questions you may have.
What's your thought on term limits?
Thoughts on term limits. So in some boards, there's no term limits, and others there are term limits. I actually think, so this is my personal view, and I sit on boards with both. I actually think I see the benefits of no term limits because there's great institutional knowledge, especially if an organization's gone through quite a bit. I also see the advantage of some level of term limits because you refresh, right? And it's not like you kind of can move away from a core group who keeps running the organization. So I see the pros and cons of both. I actually would probably personally think what's healthy is maybe extended term limits, but having some level of turn. So maybe it's, some organizations will do a term is 3 years, let's say. So maybe it's 3 terms, which is 9 years, which is a bit of time, right? Close to a decade. So something like that could be healthy, but again, it depends on the organization. Donna.
Just another way about that. So we do have term limits, and it's a 3-year term. After 2, you can renew once.
Yeah.
But then some great of those institutional knowledge, we keep board members who've termed off the board on our committees.
Oh, that's great.
Retain that institutional.
That's great. That's great. Let me just repeat that for the audience. Another way to keep institutional knowledge is to retain some of the retiring or terming off board members, either in committees or maybe other ways to engage them to maintain that. And you can term off and then have a hiatus. Maybe it's 1 term, maybe it's 2, and then come back. Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
Can you talk about any red flags to be on the lookout for?
Oh, yes, Jesse, red flags. Okay, red flags. I have to tell you, I've been very blessed for the most part to be on some amazing boards, highly functional, very professional boards. But I have to tell you, in my early board days, and this was in New York, I was on a really dysfunctional board. And I went in there, I went, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? And I resigned pretty close to 24 hours later. Some red flags. And I'll also invite any other active board members to chime in on this. I would say to really think about the leadership, board leadership, right? How are they working and running? Financially, are you in pretty good stead? Now, granted, in some organizations, you might run pretty close to the cliff, right? In the business model around, we run out of cash and then we cash up again, right? In fundraising. So, but just to see kind of what those dynamics are. So leadership, board leadership, financial standing, Reputation. You can find out, sniff things out in the community. What do you think about so-and-so or such and such board, right? Such and such organization. So you can do a lot of sniffing out there. And then earlier we talked about a little try before you buy, right? You can sit on the committee. You can maybe join in a project just to test things out. And then you can learn a lot from other board members in the community. You can also learn a lot from staff, senior staff. What's it like to work here? Right, so you get a sense, and what's the relationship like? What's the dynamic like with the board? So a couple of ways to vet it out. What else? Other questions? Yeah.
Do you have an opinion on board size?
Oh, opinion on board size. You know, it's all relevant to the organization. I would say in some board sizes, they're really large because they're big fundraising boards. As long as they're organized that way, I think it's okay. But just, I think the board size needs to be relevant to the organization and just productive and functional. Others? All right, I have a question for you as I wrap up. Love to hear from a couple of you who are not on board members. What did you learn? What did you hear today that kind of resonated?
This is probably a basic, but I think my learning was that not every board member has to pay a lot of finances in, because I'd seen a lot of boards, I'm like, how am I ever going to be on a board if they want me to contribute $10,000 for a table at an event?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, so the response was financial commitments vary, right? Financial commitments can vary. Others, yes?
I'll just add to that, like, I'm experiencing that, and so by making those connections to someone who is going to be a big contributor,
Yeah,
you can feel good about that.
that's right.
You are not in that,
Yeah.
at that level.
So the takeaway is you can either directly write the check or help bring in the funds somehow through the connections you have. That's very true. Yeah, absolutely. Let's hear from one or two others, and we'll call it an afternoon. For the active member, yeah, please.
Speaking to experience, be selective, right? Make sure that it's the right culture, the right fit, right expectations, and take your time.
Yeah.
So that's something that I learned along the way when I was first looking for board opportunities. I thought, oh, board opportunity, I'll take it, right? But I learned very quickly I should be more selective and make sure that it's, what did you say, life-giving?
Life-giving, yeah. So be selective to make sure you can, I'm repeating for the audience, but be selective and think about what type of dynamic, what type of board you want to be on, and make sure it's life-giving. Okay, yes. Liz.
Just to follow up on that is also really a board that you're passionate about, something that you're passionate about. If there's a cause, that I think that's where you really can give when you are passionate about it.
Yeah. Have passion, right? Be passionate about it and committed to it. Great, thank you. If there's anything else, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be with all of you today. And remember, we can all be board advocates. I'm afraid this can fall.
Thank you, Karen. Let's give her another round of applause. That was fantastic. All right, so thank you so much for joining us today for lunch. Look forward to seeing you next month at the Sharon Wilson Center. If you are interested in learning more about membership, please stop and see me or Sandy. Celebrating Women Leaders, we will be having more information coming out soon. We will be opening for registration for the lunch, I think within the next week or so, as well as announcing our awardees. So everyone have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you so much.